What is the most possible damage in Creatures of Sonaria? It's a question I've seen posed only a couple times, and the few videos out there on the topic are completely incorrect. So let's say we establish the perfect conditions, making full use of every buff, mechanic, and even exploits in the game. How high of a number can we reach? So in this video, we're gonna do exactly that, with the express goal of achieving the most damage in one hit. And you may think it's something only around 6,000 damage or so, but believe me, these damage numbers will begin the ascent to a higher dimension. Now let's go ahead and get started with a baseline, the lowest damage in COS. And technically, if we reach a little bit, it would be Cloud Breath, since it does no damage. However, in terms of attacking someone, any creature starts out with a fraction of its listed stats, meaning a Novus Warden baby has a solid, respectable 5 base damage. I got even lower than this with a Serpent Plushie for minus 10%, Blue Moon for minus 50, and Cower Buff for another minus 50, all while hitting a creature that fully outweighs me with 80% hunker as well. Even with all of that, it seems like the minimum and lowest damage you can hit someone with is 1. So with our baseline established, we can only go up from here. And when I say go up, I mean it. Let's go ahead and abandon this garbage Novus Warden and get to something a little more respectable. Firemia with a much better 100 base damage. On its own, it's absolutely nothing special, but let's start adding a couple damage buffs, starting with double Void Plushies, a solid 15% increase in damage. On top of this, everyone knows that any creature in the game is able to hold down the aggressive emote for a few seconds for a further 25% buff in damage. But to make our Firemia feel a little bit better about himself, we'll make it a Blood Moon, leading to a total 90% increase in damage, and our little guy to be hitting for a decent 217 total. Alright, you've done your job, Firemia. You can go home now. Now, something important to note is that the Blood Moon, aggro, and Void Plushie buffs are all able to be applied to every creature in the game. Going forward, I'm going to be grouping these together as something called generic buffs. So let's push a bit further with every generic buff in the game on a Gyro, who has 250 base damage. Obviously, we're going to use Blood Moon, Void Plushie, and aggro, and add all the other generic buffs. First up is the powerful Elder option that'll supply us with another 15%. Damage trait is another 5%, but we can upgrade said trait by 2% each veneration stage. So after enduring the full brunt force of Creatures of Sonaria's wonderfully designed game mechanics, that is going to be another 15%. And lastly, while not directly buffing your damage value, if a creature is sitting or laying, it will be a 25% and 50% increase respectively. So for this, obviously, they're going to be laying down for that 50%. So every generic buff in the game on a creature with a base damage of 250 deals a solid 1,077 damage. Not bad at all, but we've reached the quadruple digits. But I may have lied to you. I'm sorry, because there's one last generic buff that we can use, and it's a big one. Weight is an extremely important stat when calculating damage, but it's not so simple as adding a percentage onto your damage value. You see, every creature in the game has a weight stat, and as such, deals more or less damage depending on whether or not you weigh more or less than your opponent. The value that determines how much your damage is affected, I'll be calling weight ratio, and it is a clamp value, which is just something with a minimum and a maximum. In weight ratio's case, the minimum is 0, which lowers your damage by 50%, and the maximum is 3, which increases your damage by 100%. And obviously, 1 is no change. To determine the weight ratio, all you need to do is take your weight divided by your opponent's weight, and boom, you've got a weight ratio that falls somewhere on this line, and your damage will be affected where it lands. But that leads to the question, how is damage calculated? I had a very long 5-minute segment on how this works, but I'll just say this. I spent weeks finding out exactly how everything works when it comes to damage, and created an accurate calculator that anyone can use. And here it is. All you need to do is input your stats and your opponent's stats, then input any buffs you want to use, and input power charge and or spite here. Then you hit this button and the results are displayed. I've currently got it calibrated for an age 100 Angelic Warden hitting an age 100 Novus Warden, both of which have Warden's Rage, Aggro, and Blood Moon. Hitting this button, it'll say I should be hitting them for 740, and the Novus will be hitting me for 797. And in game, 740 and 797 exactly. I hope you guys like it because I've spent way too much time on it. Please help me. All right, let's get back to stacking some buffs. So clearly, if we want to achieve the most damage possible, we're going to need a weight ratio of 3 to achieve that juicy 100% increase, right? Well, on paper, it may seem like a difficult task. How the hell could this little fella outweigh one of the biggest creatures in the whole game, let alone reach that max weight ratio of 3? Thankfully, we have a solution. The corrosion debuff can be applied to any creature in the game, and you betcha it specifically lowers weight up to a 97.5 reduction, meaning this Geotherok with a base weight of 50,000, nah, it's actually just over 1,000, weighing less than our tiny little baby guy here. So now that we have that solved, we can achieve a max weight ratio of 3 using basically any creature. So let's jump forward and damage by quite a bit here. Let's take Helion Warden for a spin and make use of every generic buff in the game plus Warden's Rage. Also, Warden's Rage, it lies to you, by the way. It's not 750% increased damage, but 850% for some reason. I don't know. But there's also something very important about Warden's Rage I'll touch on soon, so keep that ability in mind. Now, with every damage buff on a Helion Warden against an opponent laying down with corrosion stacks for a full weight ratio, we end up with 5,562 damage. Pretty dang good. But let's stop messing around here and let's see the final top 3 highest damaging creatures in the entire game. At number 3, it's gonna be Noctoon, because it's got a solid 470 base damage alongside Hunter's Curse, making its max possible damage 9,436. We are dangerously close to 10,000. Number 2 is actually Fabrash, due to its 500 base damage and Hunter's Curse, allowing it to barely just brush past 10,000 damage. And finally, at the number 1 spot, to no one's surprise, it's Polymonstrum, baby, with 600 base damage alongside a spite value of 75 and every single generic buff in the entire game. The max damage in Creatures of Sonaria is 10,530. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Just kidding. I lied. Only 10,000 damage. That's absolutely pathetic. Remember when I said there's something important about Warden's Rage? Well, here's the thing. Polymonstrum should be at the number 1 spot. It should. But Warden's Rage is kind of not only an active ability, but it's also a passive at the same time, and therefore can be stacked. By activating Warden's Rage just after the global ailment timer ticks down for a few moments, you'll have 2 instances of Warden's Rage active, meaning it's not just 850% increased damage, it's 1,700. So abusing that bug on a fully venerated powerful Elder Ardor Warden with a maxed out damage trait, aggro buff, 2 void plushies, waiting for Ardor to be stat boosted for 5% more damage during a Blood Moon against an opponent who is laying down and has 90 corrosion stacks to achieve a max weight ratio of 3. The actual most damage possible in Creatures of Sonaria is... oh. It's so high that even with a fully venerated Geotherok with the highest HP in the game at 17,250, it's still not enough to survive a single hit. So, the answer to the question from the beginning, what's the most possible damage in Creatures of Sonaria? It's around 18,000. So high that nothing in the game can survive it. So with that, make sure to, I don't know, subscribe or like or something. I'm a believer in free will. You can do what you want. Just like I'm about to go to sleep. Stay safe, guys.